Hello and welcome to Counterpoint. I'm your guest host, Michelle Simard, and today we're going to be talking about the mess that's currently happening at Pearson International Airport in Toronto, where news agencies all over the world are reporting about the significant delays, cancellations, and stress when dealing with Pearson Airport, also known as YYZ. According to new data, YYZ has been ranked the worst in the world, followed by Montreal's Trudeau Airport. The question is, why is this happening? Today we have guest Richard Vanderlubbe, who is the Executive Director of the Association of Canadian Travel Agencies. And later in the show, we're going to have Greg Hill, who is the President of Free to Fly, an aviation rights and freedoms organization. Welcome to Counterpoint, Richard Vanderlubbe. So on Friday, July 22nd, there was a Toronto Star article written by business feature writer Richard Warnica, and he wrote a very thorough and detailed article on the status of Toronto Pearson's International Airport, where it was just ranked the worst in the world. And he noted that it wasn't just one problem that was the issue. There was a plenary of issues, from difficult federal COVID rules to poor planning on airlines, particularly Air Canada, who allowed people to purchase tickets but didn't have the resources to fill those tickets due to the lack of staff, as well as mismanagement from the Greater Toronto Transit Authority for handling labor shortages, and inadequate leadership from multiple bodies that has led YYZ to fall into the mess that it currently is in. I would like you to weigh in on this.
Well, I think Toronto is a unique case in North America where it is really the hub for Canada. Although, Vancouver has international travel more to Asia, Montreal is significant, but Toronto is really the hub for international travel from the US. And of course, Air Canada now has a strategy of bringing Americans through Toronto to go to Europe and elsewhere. That combined with our demographics in Canada, we're one of the most impacted by the baby boom generation. And it's hard to believe, but it's been a couple of years of baby boom retirements. And of course, when all the restrictions came for travel, one of the cost-cutting measures that the airlines did in defense was to offer early retirements for a lot of people. So in fact, there's retirees working at the airport right now to come back to try to help. So I think demographics play against us. Also, we're a city and a country that has a lot of immigration. That stopped for that period of time. And we have a hot real estate market where people were selling, retiring early, going off and living cheaper places in Canada. So I think all those reasons compound as to why the labor shortage is there in Toronto.
And so in the article that I just mentioned, the Toronto Star article, he also pointed out that when they had laid a whole bunch of people off, Pearson Airport and Air Canada, there was no plan for a return to work. So many people, obviously, they needed to get jobs. They weren't just going to rely on any type of government handout. And as a result of it, they couldn't return. But the question is, when they knew there was a plan to start opening the airports and more travel, as the government had said, didn't they have a plan in place to hire people? And if they didn't, why were they selling tickets that they couldn't fulfill?
So that's a really good question. So we're in the business of selling tickets on behalf of the airlines and travel suppliers, and we're also impacted by the same conditions that affected Air Canada and WestJet and others. Look, when you shut an industry down to the extent that Canada shut down its travel industry, it does not return quickly. And the uncertainty for a long time of knowing what the government was going to do with travel restrictions was hanging over us for a long time. Canada was very slow in relaxing those restrictions. They were quite onerous restrictions compared to the rest of the world, and we were very late in lifting them. So it's easy to stand back now and say, well, should Air Canada not have seen this labor shortage? The problem was, how can you call people back or have any sort of a plan when the industry is still shut down? We just remember that the restrictions only started lifting in mid-February, again later in March. And so here you go. So I think all the expectation was that there would be enough labor to handle the ticket sales. There's no way that this was some, plan by Air Canada to try to save on cost, because look at those bags that are sitting there. They have to be, investigated, couriered at their expense to people.
Agreed.
It is not a good situation. So it's a combination of everything. What I'm concerned about is that with the reintroduction of testing again in Toronto, for international travel, is what are they going to do with that information when a new variant's detected? It just looks like we're going to go down the same path of hoping the healthcare system can handle it and put as many restrictions in place to try to stop it or delay it. And it hasn't worked.
We're going to pick that up in our next segment. Welcome back. So as we were saying, Richard, right before we had to go for a break, you were mentioning about some of the labor shortage issues and what can happen moving forward. Let's just say as if right now the WHO just announced that monkeypox is a global emergency.
Well, let's hope monkeypox, it doesn't have near the transmissibility and near, the risk that COVID does. I think what's in front of us here is potentially a variant coming in the fall and, what's to be done at that time. I think the playbook that was there, Canada was successful in terms of its numbers of deaths and hospitalizations and what have you. We did have very strong restrictions, but the cost to this for the economy, we're seeing the hangover of that now at the airports. It's directly as a result of the industry being shut down, people being furloughed, not returning because of a number of different economic reasons, and why we have the shortages today. So what I'm hoping is that, be it monkeypox or anything else, that travel isn't looked upon as the easy scapegoat here. Why travel? Why is it always that it just seems to be a natural tendency that we still believe that we can keep this away from an international border, and it just doesn't seem to be the case. The question is, how do we change our healthcare so that we can handle or give more resources to healthcare to handle a spike that may come? But selectively shutting down parts of the economy and expecting it to turn back on like a light switch, I think is just an insane repetition of what we've gone through.
Agreed. And so, as I mentioned, it's like, what do we do for it? Is there going to be a business continuity plan? Is there going to be learning lessons? I hear your point about, the healthcare system needs to be compensated. And there should be more ways that we can deal with any types of spikes. But I also think that perhaps more staff instead of less staff, because clearly staff has been the major issue, should be at hand, because many people do get scared, and that's fine for those who get scared on traveling. But there should be more security measures in place. It may take a little longer, but at the end of the day, travel is not halted and stopped, because I don't think anybody really wants that. For those who want to travel, they can. For those who don't, they don't want to. But for those that need to, perhaps for business, they shouldn't be stopped from doing it. So I think maybe you had mentioned better assistance for healthcare, but also maybe better assistance for the airports in order to handle the load, where if there has to be more scrutiny for those who travel, then it's available. What are your thoughts about that?
I think there is absolutely a scramble for additional labor. The airlines are recruiting. They had, even earlier on, they had a lot of open positions. Same with security. I think, the peak is going to come down after Labor Day. The next test is going to be Christmas, and whether the staffing levels can be brought up to accommodate the next big peak that'll be after Labor Day. And also whether, some of the processes, the restrictions that are there that all take time to administer. If we can reduce some of those, I think we can start to see some better movement of people through the airports.
Okay, so you brought up Christmas, which is a really excellent point, because, a lot of people are starting to plan for Christmas, especially now since, it's all over the news. The BBC has talked about it, New York Times, La Presse, in France. We have news organizations all over the world talking about what a disaster it is at Pearson International Airport. And for many, they're like, should I book now? How should I book? Should I book at all? Should I even go through Air Canada? What can we do, and what should people do right now for considering, especially if monkeypox becomes an issue?
Well, I think I can tell you what consumers are doing. It's like our advanced purchase for November and December is far above 2019 levels. There's a lot of pent up demand. Even as it is right now with the passport office nightmare, and that was an entirely predictable thing. You could almost calculate what the demand was going to be by the expiring passports. So that situation, plus the airport situation, there's still really strong demand to go away. There's family that people haven't seen for years. There's much needed vacations. There's homes in different places. So the demand for Christmas is there, and it's there. It will be there, and so hopefully, after Labor Day, some of these labor shortages throughout the fall can be corrected. And I'm hoping that we don't reimpose restrictions thinking that this is going to solve the problem. I mean, a lot of other countries in the world had less stringent restrictions on travel, and therefore their industry recoveries were much quicker, and you're not seeing the kind of extremes that you're seeing here in Canada.
Well, let's hope so. And I really appreciate your time coming today. Your insight has been very, very helpful. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So now we have our other guest, Greg Hill, who's the president of Free to Fly, an aviation rights and freedoms organization. So, Greg, our previous guest was talking about some of the mess that was happening at Pearson Airport, and he had mentioned that labor shortages was predominantly the main issue, but we also discussed other issues such as mismanagement, perhaps from leadership, and also the regulations that were provided by the government and the loosening of the restrictions. I want to hear your take on this.
Sure. Well, it's, as you've pointed out, a lot of it's the labor issues, but it's multitudinous, I guess. Not sure that's even a word, but if we go back even pre-COVID, I would speak with many of my colleagues, and I'm sure they would share the same thing with you, that aviation in general is, I'll say, one snowstorm or thunderstorm away from close to chaos. If you look in years past, when a major blizzard rolls through Pearson, for instance, it's a good 24 hours for that to recover. And now you've got an industry that's not different than if you or I were to sit on a couch and eat Cheetos for the better part of the year and then be asked to run a 20K. It's not going to go well. And so you've got an industry and these airports from an infrastructure standpoint that have been very light in terms of what's been demanded of them. And then in a very rapid period, they've been demanded to get back to full speed, and it's not going well. The industry also counts regularly on the goodwill of employees to jump in and cover off shortages with overtime. And I'd suggest that given what's happened over this past 6 months to a year, many of those employees are no longer willing to jump in and cover things off with overtime. You've got boomer retirements that have kicked in and the hiring issues that you've already spoken of. And then on top of that, you've got those who are out of work due to mandates. You've got sickness and everything else that's piled on top of that. So it is a multitude of events that are all transpiring at the same time. And then from a transborder standpoint, you throw in the ArriveCan app, and I'm sure you've heard plenty about that. That's also grinding things down. The customs haul at these airports is regularly, even pre-COVID, we had what were called gate holds, where we'd hold passengers because the capacity just wasn't there. Now, when you're taking multiple times more to process each individual person that needs to go through customs, it's chaos.
It becomes daunting. Essentially, it becomes daunting. And what you're saying is that the infrastructure just isn't there. But it's not because it wasn't there to begin with. It's just that when you have a pandemic and things are shut down, the infrastructure that was there, it can't pick itself back up that quickly. And like we said, a multitude of things, but predominantly labor.
Yeah, and I've pointed out in the past as well, when you've got people that are out of work, I'm one example, and many of my colleagues as well. These are people who are experienced, and you cannot replace experience with a number. So if, let's say, you're missing 100 people from a certain baggage crew, it takes time and it takes experience to do the job quickly and efficiently. And when it's constantly new hires that are being thrown into it, the efficiency drops dramatically. And it's not the only thing that drops. Safety drops as well. And it's not just the airports. If you look at NAV Canada, who handles air traffic controllers in the country, those folks are doing overtime that's pushing the limits of their license right now. They have had to close down entire sectors of airspace within the past few weeks because they simply can't man them. So it's not just the airports, and that affects the traffic flow as well, and not just what's happening in the airport.
Okay, so then, but what can travelers do then? How do they cope? I mean, when they see a sale and they can go buy tickets, and Christmas is coming, they want to go and they want to plan their family vacation. I mean, is there anything they can do? Is there anything your association can do? I mean, how do people plan? Because if you see that it's available, the ticket, you presume that you will get on instead of expecting and going there and then they're saying your flight is canceled and it can be canceled for 2 days. I mean, there's clearly a problem here, and it's just not labor shortages. It's also the selling of tickets.
Well, we've been very vocal in pushing back against Transport Canada for a number of reasons. One of those is the ArriveCan app, and it's going to perhaps not be what people want to hear, but advocacy matters. Speaking up when things aren't going well does matter. Simply complaining amongst ourselves isn't going to change things. We need to push back against government. We need to push back against, as you've pointed out, against these airlines, against the airport authorities and otherwise. Using ArriveCan as a simple example, why something that hasn't been working well over the past 6 to 9 months, now you've got the government saying, well, ArriveCan may have been brought about just to help us cope with COVID, but we're also going to push it into broader society and help it to manage our borders. And you're sitting there scratching your head thinking, it's ground things to a halt on the transborder end, and now you're suggesting that you want to expand its use. And the only way to get back against that is for people to push back against it, right? Whether that's by contacting the
organization or notifying their local representative. And with that point, we'll be right back. Hi, Greg, and welcome back. So as we were just discussing in the previous segment, we were talking about some of the things that could possibly be the issues. But what I really want to talk about it in this final portion is how do we move forward? You said ArriveCan was a major issue and that the Canadian government seems that it may want to integrate this into everyday society. And I agree with you. Advocacy is extremely key because at the end of the day, if there's enough pushback, the government may rescind, but I agree. If there's complacency, then it can stay. I mean, I think what really needs to be done is there needs to be some form of study of some sort of like some of the issues with ArriveCan, because we always hear all these stories. These are all anecdotes, but we need some form of evidence. And I understand the viability of what the government's trying to do, but doesn't necessarily make it right. And limiting one's freedom and access to freedom is problematic. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, absolutely, Michelle, and I think you bring up a great point. When you say the word freedom, I get excited because that's really what our organization is all about. And I think what people need to understand is something like ArriveCan that shows up on the scene in the normal posture of convenience and safety. We keep hearing this over this past year. It's going to make things more convenient and safe for you. And what you find as we roll these things out is they're far more nefarious. And this is my concern with ArriveCan. If you look at the inside cover of your passport, for instance, the only thing that you need is that passport to get back into your country. And it literally says you should not be hindered or delayed in any way. Correct. And I would argue that ArriveCan is absolutely doing that, but it's not just doing that. It is a major, major concern from a privacy standpoint. And for those that would push back and say, well, the government's assured us that they're not using it for that, let's go back over very, very recent history. If you go back even to 2016, this same government was guilty of back in 2016. There was two separate issues that I want to bring up. One was in Pearson Airport, actually. They used facial recognition technology on 15 to 20,000 Canadians, unknowing. It was just brought out through an investigative report, essentially. And even over this past year, PHAC, Public Health Canada, has admitted to tracking 33 million Canadians during lockdowns using cell phone tower technology. This same government right now is also got a request, an RFD, it's called a request for, I forget what the D stands for, but looking for somebody to contract exactly that same use of cell phone towers to track Canadians. So if you're feeling that the ArriveCan app is somehow based on assurances from a privacy standpoint, not being used in ways that should be a concern for every Canadian, I think we're being naive to do so. So it's a concern from that standpoint. And if you're the kind of person that says, I don't want to put it on my phone, or as we've seen in some videos that have gone viral, I don't even have a cell phone, and you want to use like a paper copy and go online and complete your ArriveCan, then you're expected, for instance, if you're an unvaccinated person, to call your government every single day and report on your status and all sorts of things. And that violates the very underpinnings, in my view at least, of what it means to live in a free and democratic society.
It
So
does.
that's the concern.
It does, but on one aspect, as a person who does specialize in privacy, I would say that people need to use their better judgment. If they are concerned, they can contact their local representative. But furthermore, there is one thing that is guaranteed in our Constitution, and that is if you're a Canadian citizen, you are allowed to come back into this country. There may be a quarantine, there may be restrictions, but at the end of the day, if people are stuck, no matter which way or how, the best advice I would give people is this: you get on that plane, and regardless of ArriveCAN or not, you get on that plane and you get to our borders. And whatever they do at those borders, they can't deny you access because you're a Canadian citizen. You can deal with the consequences of ArriveCAN. But I agree with you. We cannot be denied our liberty and freedom to enter into our own country if we're a Canadian citizen. So for those reasons, I think personally for me, better guidance and advisory would have been definitely warranted. And as you mentioned earlier, advocacy from groups like yours and others is extremely important when it comes to issues like this, because I think, like you said, most people just want to follow the rules and they just want to be good citizens. What they don't recognize is that they have all these other issues and problems that they may face, and there's not much assistance and guidance to help them. So hopefully your organization can help. And I really appreciate all your time and effort for coming in today, because I really found your conversation very insightful. So thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. We appreciate being on.
All right. Have a great day. It seems that even when we think the pandemic has run its course and we can get on with our lives, the residual effects of poor leadership and management, with lack of proper planning and emergency protocols, will leave many stranded at Canada's largest economic hub airport. As noted from our guest today, the aviation industry is always in flux. The goal is to have it moving efficiently. COVID hit us hard in more ways than we thought. Hopefully, moving forward, freedom to fly won't be inhibited again. Thank you for watching and hope to see you soon.